The Time Trap. Daniel Hayes was a man of routine. As an architect, his life was meticulously organized, each day blending seamlessly into the next. He lived alone in a small apartment in the heart of the city, where the hum of traffic outside his window served as a constant reminder of the world's ceaseless motion. His work was demanding but predictable, and while it provided a comfortable living, it offered little in the way of excitement or fulfillment. One evening, after yet another long day at the office, Daniel found himself walking home through a quiet, dimly lit street. He was lost in thought, pondering the direction his life had taken, when a sudden, deafening crash jolted him back to reality. A car had careened off the road, slamming into a nearby lamppost. Without hesitation, Daniel rushed over to the wreckage, his heart pounding in his chest. The driver, an elderly man with a frail build, was unconscious, his head resting against the steering wheel. Daniel fumbled with the door handle, finally prying it open. As he pulled the man out of the car, something shiny slipped from the man's pocket and fell to the ground. It was an old, ornate pocket watch, the kind you might see in an antique shop. The watch's surface was intricately engraved, and despite the chaos of the moment, Daniel found himself momentarily transfixed by it. As he placed the watch into his own pocket for safekeeping, the paramedics arrived, taking over the scene. Daniel watched as they worked to revive the old man, who was still unresponsive. Eventually, they loaded him into the ambulance and sped away, leaving Daniel standing alone in the street. The watches weighed a strange comfort in his pocket. Back in his apartment, Daniel sat on his couch, the pocket watch resting in his hand. He turned it over, admiring the craftsmanship. It was surprisingly heavy, and the hands were frozen at a specific time, 10:13. He tried winding it, but the watch didn't budge. Frustrated, he set it aside and went to bed, the events of the evening still swirling in his mind. That night, Daniel dreamed vividly of the accident, the old man, and the watch. He saw flashes of strange events, moments of his life that felt eerily familiar but somehow out of place. When he woke, he dismissed the dreams as a result of the day's stress. Yet, something about the watch continued to nag at him. The next day, curiosity got the better of him. Daniel took the watch to a local antique dealer, a man known for his knowledge of rare and unusual items. The dealer, an elderly gentleman with a sharp eye, examined the watch closely, his expression growing more serious with each passing second. "This isn't just any pocket watch," the dealer said, finally looking up. "It's a timepiece crafted by a master horologist who was rumored to have discovered a way to manipulate time itself. But that's just a legend, of course."
"Manipulate time?" Daniel echoed, intrigued despite himself. The dealer nodded. "The legend says that this watch can turn back time, but at a great cost. Each time it's used, it creates a ripple effect, altering events in ways that can be unpredictable and often dangerous." Daniel left the shop feeling skeptical yet intrigued. The idea was absurd, of course, but the thought of being able to change time was enticing. What if it were true? What would he do with such power? Later that evening, alone in his apartment, Daniel couldn't resist experimenting with the watch. He held it in his hands, staring at the unmoving hands frozen at 10:13. Without fully understanding why, he twisted the crown, attempting to wind the watch again. This time, to his surprise, it clicked into place, and the hands began to move backward rapidly, spinning around the dial. The room around him blurred, and a wave of dizziness washed over him. He closed his eyes, bracing himself against the sensation of the world shifting beneath him. When he opened them again, he was no longer in his apartment. He was standing on the very street where the accident had occurred, but something was different. The sky was darker, and the air felt heavy, as though the world was holding its breath. Daniel looked around in confusion, and then he saw the car. It was speeding down the road, heading straight for the lamppost. Panic surged through him as he realized he was reliving the accident. But this time, he had a chance to change it. Without thinking, Daniel ran toward the street, waving his arms to get the driver's attention. The car swerved, narrowly avoiding the lamppost, and skidded to a stop. The old man inside looked shaken but unharmed. Daniel approached the car, breathless, as the man rolled down his window. "Are you okay?" Daniel asked, his voice trembling with adrenaline. The old man nodded, still dazed. "Yes, I think so. Thank you. I don't know what came over me." As Daniel watched the car drive away, he felt a surge of triumph. He had done it. He had changed the course of events, prevented the accident from happening. But as he stood there, something unsettling began to gnaw at him. The street around him was eerily quiet, too quiet. And then, slowly, the world began to shift again. Daniel stumbled, disoriented, as reality seemed to warp around him. When the world finally settled, he found himself back in his apartment, the pocket watch still clutched in his hand. Everything looked the same, but something felt off. The watch's hands were now stuck at a different time, 3:07. Daniel's phone buzzed on the table, and he picked it up, glancing at the screen. It was a message from his boss, but the words made no sense. "Where are you? The meeting started an hour ago."
Confused, Daniel checked the time on his phone. It was 4:30 p.m., but according to his calendar, he was supposed to be in a meeting that had begun at 3 p.m. How had he lost so much time? And why couldn't he remember anything between the accident and now? As the days passed, Daniel noticed more strange occurrences. People he knew seemed to act differently, as though they were slightly out of sync with reality. Conversations didn't quite match his memories, and small details around him kept changing. He found himself growing increasingly paranoid, questioning everything and everyone around him. Unable to shake the feeling that he had made a terrible mistake, Daniel tried to use the watch again, hoping to set things right. But each time he wound it, he found himself in a different moment, a different version of reality, each more unsettling than the last. The ripple effect the antique dealer had warned him about was real, and it was growing more dangerous with each use. One day, Daniel woke up in a world that was completely unfamiliar. His apartment was different, filled with strange objects he didn't recognize. The city outside his window was darker, with ominous clouds hanging low in the sky. People on the streets walked with a sense of dread, their faces pale and drawn. Daniel knew, deep down, that this was the result of his meddling with time. The watch had taken him too far, and now he was trapped in a reality he couldn't escape. The pocket watch, which had once felt like a powerful tool, now felt like a cursed object, a reminder of the choices he could never undo. Desperate, Daniel sought out the antique dealer, hoping for answers. But when he arrived at the shop, it was empty, the windows boarded up as though it had been abandoned for years. He was truly alone, with no way to fix the damage he had caused. As he sat on a bench in a desolate park, the pocket watch heavy in his hand, Daniel realized the full extent of his mistake. Time was not something to be tampered with. Each moment was precious, and every choice had consequences. In his desire to change the past, he had lost everything that made his life meaningful. In the end, Daniel made one final decision. He wound the watch one last time, hoping that by letting it run its course, he might find peace. As the hand spun backward, faster and faster, the world around him began to fade. He closed his eyes, embracing the darkness, knowing that whatever came next, it was out of his control. When Daniel opened his eyes again, he was back in his apartment. The pocket watch lay on the table, its hands frozen at 10:13, just as they had been when he first found it. But this time, Daniel knew better than to touch it. He had been given a second chance, and he wasn't going to waste it.
The city outside his window was alive with noise, the hum of traffic and the chatter of people going about their lives. Daniel smiled, a sense of relief washing over him. He didn't need to change the past or manipulate time. Life was messy and unpredictable, but that was what made it worth living. As he walked out the door, leaving the watch behind, Daniel felt lighter than he had in years. The future was uncertain, but he was ready to face it one moment at a time.